Welcome from the Global Development Network, from our close partner, the Center for the Studies of Social Economic Realities, CERES, based in Cochabamba in Bolivia. My name is Francesco Bino, and I lead the Research and Programs Unit at GDN, the Global Development Network. I will be chairing today's webinar, which is titled Doing Research in Bolivia, Bringing the Research Gap, Bridging the Research Gap and Improving Development Policies. For those who don't know the Global Development Network, let me say a few words as people log into the webinar. We are an international organization headquartered in New Delhi in India, and we work globally to support social science research on development issues, to inform public debate and decisions through rigorous and original analysis conducted and communicated locally by social scientists that are connected globally. We were born a couple of decades ago with a very ambitious mission, that to promote social science research capacity everywhere on development, for development, but also as development. This webinar, today's webinar, launches the report titled Doing Research in Bolivia, which is a piece of research funded by GDN's Doing Research program and implemented by our close partner, CERES. This webinar will last 90 minutes. We will have a presentation of 20 minutes by the research team who carried out the study, and 3 rounds of comments from invited speakers, whom I will be introducing later. We will then be discussing the presentation with everyone who joined us today. We had over 100 people sign up for this webinar, so I'm going to suggest that we all use the Q&A functionality of Zoom to ask your questions. Please start now if you like, and also please look at the questions that others are asking and like them if you do, so that we understand what the priorities of the group are. We'll also be posting some polls during the webinar on some of the key findings of the report to get the discussion going. If you face any issue at any point of time, you can write to us on doingresearch@gdn.int or chat with us by sending a message to panelists only in the chat box of Zoom. My colleague Joao will be on standby to help you. Now, before we move on to the presentation, I have the honor of introducing Roberto Lacerna. Roberto is currently director of CERES, where he started to work in 1981. Roberto is an economist from the National University in San Simon in Cochabamba. He obtained a master's and a doctoral degree at UC Berkeley. He teaches at San Simon in Cochabamba, in Pacifico University in Lima, Peru, and at Princeton University in the US. His areas of research include cocoa production and drug policies, poverty and inequality, democracy and social conflict, human and sustainable development. He is the author of more than 20 books, half of which have as sole author. His articles have been published in a number of academic journals, magazines, and newspapers around the globe. I'd like to invite Dr. Lacerna to deliver his welcome remarks. Thank you very much, Roberto. The floor is yours. Roberto,
good morning, Francesco. Good morning, everyone. Okay, I'm there, I'm here. Have a good morning and have a good afternoon if you are in the Northern Hemisphere, as many of you. Thank you, Francesco, and thank you all for joining this webinar. It's quite a privilege for us to be part of this launching the report of doing research in Bolivia. That was a careful and persistent work of a team coordinated by my colleagues Luis Pablo Cuba and Sharim Rivera. We already knew how difficult it is to do research in social sciences in Bolivia, but we now know that it is much more difficult to report on how research is done, and even more, how it relates with public policy. It would not be an exaggeration to say that at certain point and moment, members of the team were about to declare themselves in hunger strike just to make an interview or to collect a survey. I want to congratulate to the whole team for their tremendous effort. You did your best. I want also to thank you for keeping clean and bright the name of CERES. GDN trusted us You took a risk, GDN, and I hope the outcomes will be useful in the common purpose of promoting and improving the quality of social research and the efficiency of public policies based on them. CERES, as you probably know, was created in 1978. One of the main goals of the institution was, right from the beginning, to strengthen social sciences in Bolivia, not only by doing research ourselves, but by promoting, encouraging, and supporting whoever had the courage to do it. We knew that the task was difficult. Poverty, exclusion, instability also meant huge necessities and a set of priorities where urgency and emergency were defining political agendas. We knew that research is a long-term investment with uncertain results, but also something that had to be done to improve other investments. GDN gave us now the opportunity to look around, to look back, and to assess the current institutional framework and infrastructure for doing research in Bolivia. I will not say more on the findings. I will let Luis Pablo and Sharim to make us cry with their conclusions. Once again, I want to thank Francesco Ovino, Joao Costa, Hebe Vesuri, and also the members of the GDN team, and also particularly with Pablo, Sharim, and the rest of the CERES team. I hope that with the contributions of Laura Rovelli and Horacio Valencia, we will find here a common ground to discuss future challenges that we can face together, challenges that we are keeping up and we will overcome working together. Thank you again and welcome to this webinar from CERES and GDN.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Before we move to the funding of the report, let me just say a few words about the broader initiative this webinar and this specific report is a part of. As I mentioned earlier, the study on Bolivia we're discussing today is part of a global program at GDN called Doing Research. With Doing Research, we partner with research donors and with local research institutions to generate evidence on research systems and their evolution. The initiative is a comparative multi-country effort built around a common analytical framework that aims to describe and analyze research systems and their evolution, specifically in developing countries and specifically with regard to social sciences. Ultimately, we want to identify levers of change to strengthen social science systems based on the best possible evidence and track changes over time by conducting these assessments regularly. As I mentioned in previous webinars, this is an area on which we still know very little, unfortunately, with the immediate implication that it is rather difficult to have evidence-based discussions, let alone decisions or strategies on how the systems or how social science research systems might be strengthened, whether domestically or through support from the international level. There are a few things I would like to mention about the Doing Research program in general. The Doing Research assessment focuses on the national research system. This is because we believe that the range of opportunities and the range of challenges social scientists face, whether in terms of quality, of equity, or access to resources, or even influence on decision makers and decision making processes, are actually defined by what happens within national boundaries. This is in spite of the critical importance of regional and global connections. We define a research system as an interplay of three key functions: production, diffusion, and uptake of social science research. In other words, we're not interested in publication counts alone, but in whether the research system has the capacity to produce rigorous knowledge, how we're interested in knowing how this knowledge travels, and who accesses it. Finally, we see the Doing Research assessment, what we present today on Bolivia, just as a starting point for stimulating discussions on research policy, research funding, research priorities, in which independent and local research institutions should have a voice. Hence, of course, our choice to have independent and local research institutions lead this exercise with local principal investigators, whom we connect across countries in a network where teams learn from each other and feed the comparative knowledge into the national debates. The Global Development Network has been playing the role of a global coordinator between national and international actors interested in the generation of quality evidence on the state of national research systems. And we aspire to remain a convener and a facilitator. We keep the feedback loop between national teams and the development of the methodology, of course. We keep this feedback loop alive, drawing on the experience of national teams. But of course, we also want to keep alive another feedback loop that is between network of Southern scholars and of course, global donors interested in development research across the globe. We currently implemented the program in 14 countries. The latest entries is Venezuela with IDRC and with, of course, Hebe Vesuri, who's also part of this webinar. And we have implemented a full doing research assessment in 4 countries along the last 20 months. Beyond Bolivia, we worked in Nigeria, Myanmar, and Indonesia, as some of you know. And we started, in fact, in El Salvador as of last week. Without further ado, I would like now to leave the floor to our colleagues who led the study in Bolivia for a presentation of the findings. Our speakers today are Luis Pablo Cuba, who's a senior coordinator at CERES, and Sharim Ribera, who's a coordinator also at CERES. The floor is yours. Sharim or Luis, whenever you'd like to start, we are ready. João, if you can just put up, maybe we can put up the slides.
I think you will be using something wrong with the...
Okay, thanks. Sorry. This assessment, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. This assessment analysis the research system in Bolivia based on the methodology developed under the Doing Research program, an initiative of the Global Development Network, GDN. The results obtained from the data collected during 2019 are intended to contribute to a national debate on the production and use of social science research for the good of society. As the political moment rapidly shifts to an arena with the new authorities, new public policies must be imagined and designed, and the challenge of using the available research and generating a new data must be faced. In this context, this study becomes a first approach to provide systematic and comparable information on local research in the country. The main question guiding this project was raised on how to effectively evaluate the social science research system in Bolivia to identify the structural barriers to research and highlight potential pathways for action. The methodology implemented includes 3 stages, starting with a general evaluation of the context, followed by a mapping of national actors to identify the producers and users of the research and culminates in the framework of the indicators proposed by the Doing Research project. Project results confirm that the social science research culture in Bolivia is shaped by a wide range of interconnected factors and actors. Significant levels of institutional dispersion have been identified, which contributes to the existence of non-related research agendas. Consequently, the study shows that social science research in Bolivia remains weakly linked to the design of public policies. Connecting research and policy making poses a great challenge in this environment, particularly as research does not support policy debates and the decision-making process. This report concludes with an identification of the levels of change that address the main structural design constraints reflected in the study. This perspective will be essential to foster the new types of collaborations and the individual and system levels necessary to encourage the use of well-developed research practice. Before giving the floor to my colleague, Janine Rivera, allow me to comment on the institutional experience we had when participating in the World Conference in Bonn, Germany, held last year, where the discussion was held around how to strengthen the capacity of the current research for development system to face new development challenge and facilitate sustainability. On that occasion, we were able to participate in high-level and truly inclusive evidence-based debates on current development challenge and priorities. Inspired by our experience, we aim to share knowledge for development by highlighting relevant and current research on development, and by giving developing countries such as Bolivia a voice in shaping global policy debates on sustainable development. Thanks. Por favor, please, Shari. Thank you.
So can everyone see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
So as per the previous comment, the main motivation of this study was to generate first-hand evidence of the production, diffusion, and use of social science research in Bolivia in an effort to better understand the current research practices and support also future debates on the development of our research culture. So as part of this first phase of the Doing Research project, all the key factors from that impact the social science research system in Bolivia were analyzed across 4 dimensions. We analyzed them on the political dimension, historical, cultural dimension, international, and economic dimension. So on a first note, the analysis of the political context allowed
Sharon, we can see your the Word document. In fact, can you, if you can go back to the slide and have it on as a.
Sure. I don't know which screen I'm sharing.
Now we can see your desktop. No problem. I think you just need to press the exactly the slideshow view.
It's right here. I'm seeing it on the screen. So let me check the screen sharing options. So. That's what tests. So important. Okay, so share my screen.
Don't worry, just yeah. Perfect. If you keep the slideshow view, then we'll just see the slides larger. Now we see them a bit small. Yes. Excellent, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So let me go back to. Everything's okay?
Yeah, we also see your notes, but I guess it's fine. Yes, just please go on. No problem.
Are you able to see only the presentation?
We see the slide. Just
Okay,
go ahead. No problem.
Okay. So as I was saying, on the political note, we assessed, we were able to establish kind of the non-existence of a specific policy for social science research. We were able to balance the existence of a common state and private research agenda. And we found almost an excessive centralization of the decision-making processes in government entities, which to our perspective leaves little room for interaction with the rest of the actors of the social science research system. We found that social science research in Bolivia has its own characteristics, its own peculiarities that are inherent to the national context. So many of the interviewees and research and survey responses agreed that these particularities have shaped or have contributed to the emergence of new areas of analysis, such as indigenous studies, public representation, informal economy, plurinational nature of our society, just to name a few. However, most researchers agreed that they try to evade certain topics of research so that they are not criticized or even stigmatized by the research or government community. Since they kind of perceive a high level of ideologization, and they seem to think that most research carried out in the country kind of falls under a political line. So this, of course, this will condition the intellectual production and will limit the interaction with the state institutions. On the historical and cultural dimension, we are able to see how there was an attempt to recover all local and ancestral knowledge, and also a conceptualization of living well was used to improve social welfare policies. However, even though it's understood that culture is not understood as isolated from the rest of the social influences, it is perceived that it can help us understand the whole national context. And it's completely seen as an invaluable source of input for research. However, basing research only on ancestral knowledge has mostly resulted in a devaluation of evidence-based knowledge with little government support for the production of scientific knowledge. The international dimension is very well recognized by the interviewed people for this research, in the sense that international integration into wider research networks can foster academic exchange and collaboration in so many ways. To date, here in Bolivia, almost 13 institutions at a national level are part of the Latin American and Caribbean research networks, and 14 are full members of CLACSO, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences. So even though there are certain networks that we are part of, we still think that capacities for international integration need to be strengthened. On the economic dimension, we we saw two main elements. The lack of highly skilled human professionals and the lack of opportunities in the field of social sciences. So as a result, we think that the system fails to produce like a critical mass of researchers. Even though the number of researchers with a master's or PhD degree have increased, the migration or brain drain levels have also been significant. So many professionals are migrating to more developed countries for more interesting opportunities in the field of social science research. With regards to R&D, although efforts have been made to consolidate science and technology as part of the main pillars of the economy, I think we need a more consistent approach because there are still challenges in terms of institutional development, articulation, and public or private allocation of funds to this specific area of study. So here we would like to emphasize the need of policy development to cover for current and upcoming challenges. I think Bolivia has, let's take for example this last economic dimension. Bolivia has experienced over a decade of booming growth based on commodity exports and the execution of infrastructure and industrialization projects. But we have evidenced a certain detachment of the state from the economy that functions out of this influence of a natural resources logic. So correcting the course of current policies that will address other institutional reforms across the whole system is very important in this sense. We consider that it's highly important at this point to identify all our research capacities, to map all our research institutions, and most importantly, to assess the ability of policymakers to take into account all the information that is being generated. For this, we have seen that through the stakeholder mapping, we were able to identify all the actors involved in the social science research system in Bolivia. So we worked with 4 categories of actors that included higher education institutions, both private and public universities, government and funding agencies, NGOs, nonprofit think tanks, and the media as part of the civil society, and also other organizations of the private sector. We took into account different criteria for selecting our sample. We took, of course, the category that I just mentioned, but also the location and size of institutions based on the number of researchers that they currently employed. For purposes of this project, we worked with 155 surveys that gave us data from researchers, research administrators, and policymakers. The main criteria was that these institutions had an interest or were experienced and actively involved in social science research in the country. This led us to work under the DRA framework. So the DRA results have been presented across the 3 main functions of social science research, which are production, diffusion, and uptake. Our most relevant findings regarding production, as you can see here, we have identified that relevant research is produced in different areas of work. And although the production of research has increased, this still suffers from serious deficiencies. We're talking in terms of quality, in terms of regulations, and in terms of organization. So in the absence of a law or an agency responsible for coordinating research activities, all research activities remain isolated and limited due to budgetary, political, or lack of interaction among the actors. Even though research is being produced, it is not supported or sought out by public policymakers. This confirms the lack of interaction that we were talking about, but also a few other details were taken into account and found very relevant for the presentation of the results. For example, the moderate satisfaction with infrastructure versus a lack of elements such as software for research and data analysis that both researchers and research administrators found essential for their line of work. Surprisingly, there's no national research policy specific to the social sciences in place, or a body that articulates research activities in Bolivia, as I mentioned before. Likewise, there is no peer review culture, and this might come up as Bolivia lacking parameters to measure quality under internationally accepted standards. So this goes along the limited publication of articles in Index Journal, the limited number of full-time researchers across all institutions. For example, here only 80%, only 30% of full-time professors at universities are indeed full-time researchers as well. So the numbers are very, very low. If you are able to see, this goes hand in hand with the lack of access to research mentors, with the little or no continuous research capacity development across all institutions. You can see that training is minimal in a period of 3 years. And so is the percentage of personnel that's working on research activities or research institutions that hold a PhD in social science or similar. One very important result is the perception of attractive career opportunities for researchers. So as you can see across all the categories of actors that we've worked with, the levels of insatisfaction or lack of opportunities are perceived. So this is kind of worrying.
Sharim, 1 second, because the slides that we see are actually a bit small, so it's a bit hard to see the graphs. So what I propose is that we switch. So Joao is gonna show the slide, so we can show it bigger, or you can do this as well.
Yeah, I'd rather Joao. He's more professional at this than I am.
Excellent. Now we see it.
Perfect. Okay. So, well, as if we can go to the next slide. Okay. When talking about diffusion, we've encountered that this specific function is kind of the weakest aspect of the Bolivian research system. The linkages, like the interaction between categories of actors, are weak. So researchers work more with nonprofit organizations and institutions such as national universities than with the government itself and other actors like international organizations. So this means that the impact on or participation in public policy development will be reduced. An interesting thing is that actors mentioned how budget planning and the type of financing would sometimes determine whether the results of an investigation are made public. Also, we have found limited participation of researchers in international research projects, where half of the researchers reported that they are not currently affiliated with any international research network or registered in an international repository to access current data. It's interesting how written publication continues to be a priority for most institutions. So it's preferred over conferences and debates when it comes to share results of their work. Also, internet and social media platforms have become, well, among the population that was studied for this project, have become some of the most popular spaces and preferred to research dissemination, for research dissemination. This opposed to their preference over newspaper, television, and radio coverage. When it comes to uptake, we have found opposing views, very significant opposing views on how research is used. So while government agencies that were part of this project affirm that there is a common practice to use or to formulate public policies based on social evidence, the rest of the actors would say that that it's the other way around. So as you can see on this, I'm not sure if I can zoom in here. 60% is the high percentage of policymakers that affirm to have requested research on policy-related topics from other institutions. However, when you come to see the replies and the responses from other actors such as higher education institutions or private sector or NGOs, you can see that neither the researchers or administrators have participated in minimal percentages of the formulation of research policies. They were particularly asked for their participation in either phase of public policy formulation, and the percentages are pretty high when it comes to not having participated in any of them. However, it is very important to recognize the potential that they see on their institutions and the work they're carrying out to be used for public policy formulating and design. Other significant impact factors that we've identified are regarding the considerable evidence for researchers to carry out work without the pressure of political or government entities. However, this has become an indifference towards the academia rather than a policy of promoting independent knowledge production. So on top of that, there is little incentive for researchers to participate in the design of public policies. And this is reflected on the lack of participation of researchers and research administrators that we've reached out to in matters of having been part of a public policy design entity or part of our government agency in charge of policy design. It is interesting also to mention how political interests prevail over evidence-based research and how there's a lack of evidence-based research in the formulation on an execution of public policy, contrary to what representatives of government agencies have mentioned. So I'll be quick on the conclusions. We've identified a lack of support for scientific research. It is very clear that there isn't a national research coordinating body for the social sciences. And there's a lack of collaboration and engagement that inhibits the production of more actionable research. So the institutional strengthening on this matter will be critical if we want to promote a long-term development of the Bolivian research system. So we've come to the point where we've identified the need for a common agenda and any action that will consolidate strategic partnership among the actors to influence policy making. As part of this collaborative framework, though, it is important to acknowledge that the context conditions will not be the same within the actors. So it's very important to acknowledge heterogeneity among the actors in regards to priorities and incentives for each. The need for quality data will be different for each sector. Therefore, multiple approaches will be required to develop practices within each category of actor. When we mention that context matters, it's also important to see how internationally accepted quality standards or indicators need to be adapted to our social factors and to our own context. So this is very important, because throughout the study, we've identified that many indicators don't apply, don't exist, are not recognized as quality indicators. So it's very important that we identify our own that will still qualify us to be part of global or international research communities. Finally, one other conclusion is that we need to create demand for responsible policy making, because it doesn't matter if you produce and keep producing research, it has to be relevant for those people who are in charge of making of decision-making processes. So it's very important to count on a transdisciplinary research community in order to transfer and share and create knowledge and data. Based on these conclusions, we've come to identify a few levers of change to address the major structural constraints that we have identified throughout the project. So the following levers of change that I will mention are considered the most relevant and maybe to be considered a priority when defining upcoming reforms. The first one, it has to do with knowledge transfer. We know there's a current silo-based production across research activity in the country, which makes it difficult to promote effective transfer of knowledge from researchers to policymakers. So data has been generated in isolation, and to the point that everyone's researching on the same topic, but not knowing what other institutions are working on. So here we need to articulate and promote transfer of knowledge. We want to strengthen the main locations where knowledge is generated, which are La Paz, Cochabamba, and Santa Cruz. However, we don't want to miss out all the production that is being generated in smaller, more isolated regions in the country. So the idea is to bring them on board under a national coordinating body. And there have been previous initiatives in Bolivia that demonstrate the willingness of different actors to participate in this kind of networks. So we think that if we work on a model similar to the one that DIEB implemented a few years back, I think this can be a right pathway for action. Another lever of change is proposed with regards to effective governance, and there are 3 points. Financing, in the sense that financing can be secured if done under a national coordinating body that can work in representation of regional units. rather than independent one-by-one institutions. Effective governance is also seen from the point of view of access to data, which we find is essential to develop any viable system of regular collection of data and information that will support policy design. Of course, this needs to be done with national entities that already have this responsibility, like the National Institute of Statistics, and in cooperation with government entities, both at municipal and departmental levels. One important, really important element will be reducing and simplifying all bureaucratic procedures in the country. Specifically, when it comes to decentralizing the activity, the supervision activity, and helping minimize the restrictions imposed by current regulations, particularly in terms of accessing resources required by NGOs, for example, to operate effectively. Close to last, we want to propose capacity building. Once again, looking at the success of the PF model a few years back, we think that investing in capacity building development can increase the academic level of the researcher population, but also create a new generation of young researchers that will become a critical mass in the next 10 years. And last, we want to emphasize on actions that can be set out to monitor research activity. So this can be done with rigorous institutional and policy regulations or frameworks that can ultimately lead to the institutionalization of social science research. So the process of securing or guaranteeing accountability or transparency in all research activities at a country level, of course, can contribute to the growing recognition of the importance of research in supporting socioeconomical policy development. So, of course, we can go on into further detail, but I think this has been kind of a summary to set out an idea of what is going on the status of the social science research system in Bolivia.
Thank you very much, Harim, and thank you, of course, Luis, and the rest of the team, including Roberto. I think this is really interesting. There's a lot of questions coming in already about things like, you know, how do we interact with policymakers in general that do not believe, in fact, in evidence and research and science, let alone those who haven't, you know, a system that hasn't got to the point where science is part of the process. But how do you deal with people who actually don't believe or really approach science? I think this is a question that is relevant, you know, very broadly, much beyond, of course, the specific case of Bolivia, and you know, how do we avoid capture of a national research coordinating body? Of course, there are also questions on Bolivian researchers. You know, how well integrated are they at the regional level? What, you know, is the size of brain drain? So a lot of questions already coming in, and I'm cautious that we don't have too much time. We're running a little bit late, so I'll just jump directly to the commentators, and I will introduce first Hebe Vesuri, Professor Hebe Vesuri, who's been a advisor to the CERES team during this month, and she's of course been also involved in the Doing Research program for a few years. She's a great supporter of us, which we really appreciate. But of course, she's also an emeritus researcher at the Venezuela Institute of Scientific Research, former director of the Science Studies Center at the Venezuelan Institute of Scientific Research. She has worked in a number of universities around the region, Unicamp in Brazil, UNAM in Mexico, in Argentina with St. Pat Conicet. She's an authority for those interested in science and technology in the region and research systems. So Hebe, can you share with us your comments about the report in about 8 minutes? Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you, Francesco. Thank you, everybody. I'm really very pleased to share this virtual space with GDN and with my Bolivian colleagues. It's been a privilege and a true learning experience to accompany the evolution of the project. Well, what you were mentioning, both Karim and now Francesco, the current state of research systems in developing countries is a cause of concern, since we often see cases where local researchers are unable to carry out useful quality research that can feed into the public debate and policy discourse. And we see this thing going apart. No? In this context, in-depth analysis of research systems like those promoted by GDN, I think that they are key to understanding how to bridge the research policy gap and to raise the profile of research that is being generated. The report made public today aims to contribute to Bolivia's delicate political debate and also in developing partners' approach to cooperation with national actors, with private and both public and private, that produce, that diffuse, that use research to support decision-making and policy implementation. And what stands out is this systematic disconnect between those who produce research and those who need it to use it. The report is timely in that sense, in identifying the opportunities and structural barriers to doing research and in highlighting pathways for action. We learned that there is a limited amount of full-time research in Bolivia, that research activities tend to be carried out in isolation, that there is limited participation of researchers in international collaboration and research projects that are also useful. It's not that we are just being brainwashed when we go into the international world, but no, other things happen and that can be very useful. There is little incentive for researchers to participate in the design of public policies. And the report also includes, very interestingly, the levers of change that they find. No? Apparently there is this need to introduce career advancement policies and incentive mechanisms in higher education that would encourage competition, transparency, collaboration, and something very important that they mentioned is respect for the visions of other researchers and methodological plurality, which is in such a complex, rich, heterogeneous country like Bolivia that has the word plurality in its official name as a plural nation. Plurality is very important here. Create a national network, they find out that this is needed to coordinate between universities, governments, research institutes, the private sector, and other relevant stakeholders. They mentioned the need of introduction of a national research policy and a national research body to articulate research activities in Bolivia, which is an ambitious proposition. And something very important too is the need to raise the standard of social science research in Bolivia. And this needs establishment of a peer review system. But I would like it to be more than just peer reviewing in the sense that we all know as reading prospective papers to be published. It's not just that. We need the intervention of colleagues, the dialogues, the conversation, the interchange of ideas and so on, in order to have this ventilation of ideas and the possibility of raising standards. We need standards everywhere and also in Bolivia. Adopt a diffusion model similar to the one established by the Fundación para la Investigación Estratégica en Bolivia, el PIEB, which is, again, I think is an interesting idea, recognition of things that have worked out well. Strengthen the role of international cooperation in facilitating the creation of research networks and international exposure of researchers. And there is this sense of urgency, you know? This is an assessment that constitutes the first systematic analysis carried out at country level to better understand current research practices and policies. And it really provides us with first-hand evidence of the production, diffusion, and use of social research in Bolivia in order to advance that future debate on the development of the country's research culture and system. And we are all aware that what is coming, not just in Bolivia, everywhere, but what is coming is heavy. In the coming years, Bolivia will need to address export decline, fiscal deficits, political stress, social upheaval, market adaptation, technological inclusion, and institutional reforms across the whole system. And that is social. That is not, well, it includes environmental issues, climate, and so on, but it's clearly a social science world, and we need responses, but for that, we need also to research because we need data. Therefore, this seems very important to mobilize research capacities, to map research institutions and assess the ability of public policymakers to project their needs and to absorb and make use of evidence in public debates. The research policy nexus is key in this. And the report has interesting things to say about this. It has identified 3 coexisting models that act as potential channels for connecting research and policy making. They found nice words for those, what they call the polishing model, that is when politicians want to polish their public image, by associating with reputed researchers or reputed institutions mostly. The spotlight model, when social research is well presented and supported by data and evidence, and politicians want to be part of it or be seen as being part of it, because then they look more intelligent, more serious, and so on. And the toolkit model, when politicians in office require resources for specific projects to help them attain results for their constituencies. But in doing all these, it also calls attention to the need of having good and relevant research done. That is, all along, there is this insistence in the research. And I would like to comment very, very briefly on the methodology and the project limitations and virtues, because the limitations are recognized in written way. And I like that the authors made good use of those limitations by admitting to a choice of indicators that takes into account the context in which the study was developed, despite the recommendations of the GDN support team, which was a very interesting exercise. The arguments that the authors use in the report are quoting a reference, an important reference is the Leiden Manifesto. It is a recent manifesto of calling for contextuality in the definition of indicators and so on. And what I like here is that I witnessed the protracted and rigorous exercise of stakeholder mapping, stakeholder listing, stakeholder validation, to have the sample on which they were going to work and produce this evidence-based research, which gives greater value to their findings, that the different stakeholders, for example, seek their own benefit without any articulation of common interests among them, which hinders the development of efficient production of social science knowledge. They did it in a very rigorous manner. So they had all the support of GDN with this protocol of research that is also necessary, because the whole aim is to point to a comparative analysis in different national situations, but taking into account the context. That today was also recovered in the presentation that Shireen made, that context matters, but it matters in a very intelligent way. Reports like the present one are not frequent in the debates on public policies that tend to omit these important issues. That is why it is a welcome addition, for it asks questions and includes evidence about the types and capabilities required for fostering high quality social research production, the kinds of context that favor such research activity, and the types of policies needed to create healthy research environments or ecosystems. Well, this is what I wanted to comment today. Rapid, because we are late. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ebe. Let's go straight to Laura Rovelli, who has a PhD in social sciences and is a researcher and coordinator of the Latin American Forum of Research Assessment. FOLEC is the Spanish acronym for the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, CLACSO, as many of you know. FOLEC's CLACSO is the regional space that has more than 30 allied organizations and institutional science, technology, and higher education from the global south and the global north. It supports, of course, open, common, and public domain of knowledge and its connection with high quality, relevant, and sustainable research. FOLEC seeks to reach a common and regional proposal on research assessment transformation by November 2021. So an ambitious goal, and all the rest of that. Tell us, what do you think of the report? What is your perspective on this from your own of course, standpoint of some of the works at the regional level on research evaluation?
Okay, well, thank you very much, Francesco, for the invitation. Thank you to the GDNet for this space, and it is a pleasure and an honor to share the exchange with Ebe Besuri and all of you, the whole team. It was very useful, very true learning, reading the material. So I will make some general comments. First of all, I think that it is a significant contribution to local analysis of research systems. The documents provide interesting overview about the state of social science in Bolivia. That is something that is not very common to read as regards research. There is also a contribution to research policies, to assessment policies, to science technology policies, and also to higher education studies, because the documents make focus particularly on the role of public and also private universities in Bolivia. And I think that there is a very relevant question guiding the research project. What can be done to further generate a mainstream local research as a key input to public debate and sustainable human development policies? This is, I think, a key question for all the region, for all the countries in the region, and that should be answered and in articulation between national agencies of research and also other institutions like CLACSO and universities, in order to tackle this problem. As regards the document structure and methodology, I think I share Ebe Besuri's perspective. It was an appropriate context analysis. It's very clear the Bolivian context and its influence on the policies that we are assessing. There is also an original stakeholder mapping, relevant indicators for production, diffusion, and uptake. That is also a very original dimension that is not always covered by these type of documents in the region. And that we hope that some of these indicators can dialogue and be extended with other contributions that then I will mention. So it is a document that mixes research methods. There is a wide collection and analysis of qualitative and quantitative data. There are useful sociograms, Mendeley matrix also, among other analytical instruments. So I think that it's a plural methodological approach based on clearly evidence that is not so frequent about the Bolivian case, no research analysis case. As regards the finding, well, I will make some focus on research assessment in particularly. The substantial increase in research production in social science over the last decades and of researchers with PhD is quite significant. It is a relevant information. We would like to know more about the age, the gender, the international academic mobility of those researchers, disciplines, national and international graduation of those PhD candidates. I know that this is a very difficult information to find and that you have made a great job, but I think that these are other information that can stimulate future analysis of the Bolivian case. There is also very well proposed in the document a tension between, or there is you identify an independence of researchers at universities, but also an indifference towards knowledge production from policymakers and state agencies. So there, I think that we have also very interesting tension to work on not only in the Bolivian system, but particularly in this case, and also to work on the idea of autonomy that researchers develop and how this could be revisited as regards other dependencies that these researchers have with other actors of the international system. Then it was very important to read about the low peer review culture in Bolivia. This has an impact on a limited regional and international visibility and transparency of the production, of the knowledge production of the system, and also a point that you comment on the document. It's about a very strong mission-oriented policy in the last years towards the recovery of ancestral knowledge of indigenous people in Bolivia. I think that there is also another tension to work on because that tendency, it seems to be confronted with with academic knowledge. From reading your report, it seems like there is a segmented circuit of knowledge, one as regards the policy making, and another that is related with the research that we have at the university. And furthermore, there is a disconnection between knowledge production and its use, as the colleagues were mentioning before. So I think that another key question of this report is what can be done to strengthen social relevant knowledge production and quality research assessment. We need there a balance between locally relevant research in local languages, including regional indigenous languages, not only Spanish, with research which has global relevance and is globally communicated and disseminated. Another point that I found very interesting in the report is the low professionalization of research and academic career. There is, as it was mentioned by the colleagues, a limited amount of full-time researchers. Activities are done in isolation, and also limited international collaboration, and the need of incentives, the document says, both financial and otherwise, to strengthen the research career in Bolivia. Another point that is crucial is the lack of national data system. The access to regular information useful for policy formulation. I think that this is a more regional problem, a common regional problem in many other systems that make very difficult to make comparative studies because of the lack of regular information on research capacities. And it must be highlighted that also the lack of a national research policy goes along the lack of a national research assessment policies. Yes, there is a project of a plurinational agency for evaluation and accreditation of higher education, but it's yet a project, as I was saying, and in the evaluation and accreditation of higher institutions in Bolivia is voluntary and follows the Arca-Sur regional system. Yeah? So we don't have in Bolivia clearly a strong research assessment system. So there is a necessity as regards research assessment to consolidate research assessment system grounded in the Bolivian case, yes, grounded, as I was saying, sorry, an image came in pantalla. As I was saying, to consolidate a research assessment grounded, high quality and relevant as regards the social demands of the Bolivian people. Internationally, with the tendency of developing open science, but also a favorable context in Bolivia to strengthen in the future research quality, mission-oriented research related to the global development objectives, and to strengthen also inclusivity of different population that was traditionally isolated from the research system in the Bolivian research case. So that will be my comments. I also have some questions for the team, but if you prefer, I can make those questions later.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Laura. Very, very interesting comments. We are running a little bit out of time, so I'll jump to Horacio, and we might have to shrink. We might have to shrink a bit the discussion with the discussion between the team and the attendees because of time constraints. But we will address all of the questions that have been asked. So let me then introduce Horacio Valencia Rivamontan, who was principal economist at CAF, so the Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina. Horacio is an economist trained at the Bolivian Catholic University. He obtained a master's degree in economics from the Pontifical Catholic University of Chile. He is the author of several research studies on labor markets, evaluation of public policy, impact evaluation, poverty, and informality. Please, Horacio, you have 8 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Hello to everyone. First, let me thank the team of Global Development Network and CERES for inviting me to comment the Doing Research study in Bolivia. It's always challenging to be the last commenter, especially after the very interesting interventions of Jeff and Laura. Let me congratulate also the research team for the clarity with which the main findings of the study are presented. I believe the document fulfills its objective since it identifies structural barriers and opportunities associated with the development of social research in Bolivia. In my intervention, I would like to highlight some points that I believe are particularly relevant in the context of building bridges between academia and public policy. Likewise, the findings of the Doing Research study motivates of the elaboration of more questions and inquiries about possible steps to achieve the objective of generating an environment of greater integration and promotion of social research. As Luis Pablo and Shireen mentioned in the presentation, the development of an environment that promotes the implementation of evidence-based policies is essential in a developing country like Bolivia. Furthermore, although in previous years there have been important advances achieving social improvements related to reducing of poverty, inequality, and increasing of access to basic services, the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic imposed new scenario where public policies needs to be more coordinated, better informed, and better implemented. Public policies should seek to promote the recovery of the economic path of growth and try to reverse the negative impacts, especially the social negative impacts caused by the pandemic, all this in a context of maybe fewer access to financial resources. Several points highlighted in the conclusions of the document are topics discussed and commented for many years in research in Bolivia. However, there wasn't a systematic evidence until the present study. Therefore, the document is an important tool to search comprehensive solutions on in the development of a research environment that should be better coordinated and focused on public policy needs. This study also identifies the importance of the context in which social research is developed in Bolivia. In this regard, a relevant fact is that the economy and political context is already established. Therefore, the institutions intending to develop social research need to adapt their work to the existing context, trying to generate spaces of work within an already established framework. One of the main conclusions of the document is the disconnection identified between social research and public policy needs. In this sense, a question that arises in my mind is how research centers and universities can adapt their research to give a quick and relevant response to public policy problems, taking into consideration the conditions of the existing social research that is identified in the document as well. To the best of my understanding, universities are the main actors called to participate actively in the integration and development of social research. First, because there are institutions with more technical capacity to carry out research. Second, because of the financial autonomy and the autonomy of action identified in the document, which allows them to respond quickly to the needs raised by the context. Another question that arises, why universities are not taking this role already, and how do we motivate universities to take a more active role in responding the needs of public policy and to build bridges between academia and public policies? Maybe good practices of other countries in the region like Chile, Colombia, and Argentina as well could be relevant. Furthermore, the disconnection identified and quantified in the social research is not only limited to universities and government, it's also within the universities and between universities and universities with private research centers and NGOs. So how do we promote an environment for dialogue between actors that allows first, identify common points of development of research, and how we seek for synergies and complementaries? The latter could be important in helping reduce administrative costs and affiliation costs, which the study has found to be very restrictive for social research in Bolivia. Universities also have another major challenge ahead. As the study mentioned, many of the researchers do not have the capacity to conduct research. Therefore, the challenge for universities is twofold. First, to strengthen the scope and skills of the research team, and second, ensure that the students are trained with the necessary tools that allow them to have the capacity to carry out research. Another question that arises is why not most of the universities or investigations are carried out in isolation. Simple solutions such as generating databases with information could improve the connection within and between research centers. A network that allows access to public and free information in a very updated time of investigation carried out by each researcher and each research center, the objectives of each investigation, the state of progress of the investigations could help to generate knowledge of the developments by each researcher and therefore generate spaces for dialogue between researchers. In the same area, although it's true that the government needs to improve the access to public information and then is a necessary step to improve the social research in Bolivia, it's also true that the efforts made by different researchers to generate information and databases are not shared between researchers. In this sense, knowing the developments of information or databases and making this information available to other centers will allow generate synergies. Actions as simple as including one question or two questions in a questionnaire could avoid the duplication of efforts and the specialization in the generation of different sources of information. An additional point that could be useful looking ahead could be the seek of schematization of the connection that already exists between different researchers in universities and research centers and politicians. Understanding who works with whom, identifying good practice of some institution will allow to understand the mechanisms that work in the existing connection between different actors in Bolivia. Finally, another conclusion mentioned in the document indicates the need to improve the challenge of transmission of research results to public policy. Regarding socialization, improving practice that seeks to summarize in an executive and friendly way the main result of the investigation or that arise public policy implications could facilitate the access to policymakers to this information and within the use of the knowledge already generated. There are some successful experiences that I could mention as good practice of development to seek to bring researchers and research closer to the implementation of policies. In this regard, the developments made by INESAT, ARU, and the Sustainable Development Solution Network in Bolivia are positive examples. That's what I like to comment about the doing research study in Bolivia. Again, thank you very much for the invitation. I give you back the floor, Francesco.
Many thanks, Horacio. Very interesting comments again, and I feel there's a kind of extension between, or maybe kind of a double kind of suggestions in all the comments and in the conclusions as well of the report. But it's split between what can be done without a cooperating kind of governmental machinery. So what can be done directly by universities, what can be done directly by researchers, what can be done irrespective of major change on the policy side, and on the other kind of ideas and proposals on how to design an overall on the system, so that the use of evidence, the commissioning of research, the circulation of research, its discussion in the public domain, in public debates, becomes institutionalized. Yeah. So a bit of tension between what can be done irrespective of political change, and what would be interesting steps to take if the larger institutional landscape could actually change. I'm sorry, we will not have much time left. So we had planned for Roberto to take over from me and moderate about 20 minutes of discussion to answer some of the questions that have been asked from the audience, of course, from all of you. They are Roberto and Sharim and Luis are already answering some of these questions in the Q&A kind of section of the website, and we will be publishing basically a document with all of those questions and the answers. So if we haven't addressed your question, make sure to visit our website later, and you'll find an answer to your specific question as well. But I think maybe we have time to address one question, and I'd like to pick the question of regarding how do we push evidence, with a system that doesn't necessarily, it's not built to use evidence and doesn't necessarily believe in evidence. So how do we introduce in this system, for example, a national body to oversee research policy, research funding, and research strategy, and avoid the risk of capture. And I don't know if Roberto or Sharim or Luis want to comment on this. What's the perspective on this? How do we institutionalize in the short term, in a way, further research, avoiding the risk actually of capture, given an environment which is not necessarily moving towards a larger use of evidence in public debate. Sharim, Roberto, would you have any comment on this?
Yeah, I think Roberto can take over, if that's okay with him.
Roberto?
Okay, somebody else must open my. Okay.
We can see you and we can hear you.
That's great. I think that we face this in this situation a kind of a dilemma. We want to be influential. We want to influence public policies, and in order to do that, usually we try to look forward for issues that are relevant for the politicians, and issues that are in the public agenda already. Like, I don't know, in the last years, indigenous participation or indigenous culture or inequality, things like that. And we think that by addressing those issues that are already in the minds of the politicians, we will be influential. We will promote something new. We will contribute to their endeavor. However, usually that doesn't happen. Usually what happens is that politicians that have those issues in their minds or in their agendas have already some ideas on what to do, how to address them, and they tend to be indifferent to social science research. So the alternative to that is probably to do research by the relevance of the topic as we think they are relevant. And that means to strengthen the connections between researchers and the research community, and to pursue our ideas and to identify new problems, issues, etc., without thinking that we must push forward the political agenda. What I mean is that if we are good enough, if we have high quality research, if we are convincing enough in the results, in the outcomes of our research, we will probably be influential in the medium or long run. So my idea would be, let's forget about the short-term influential capacity, etc., on the political agenda, because the political agenda has been already written and is closed, and politicians will be indifferent to whatever we think about those issues. And the challenge for us should be to think in the long term and to do the best as we can in research, to improve the quality of research, and to identify new issues, new topics, new approaches. So at a certain point, the new politicians will pay attention to what we have to say, and in that sense, the connection will be done based on good quality research and not short-term interests or short-term opportunities.
Thank you. I think that makes all sense. I mean, what I take from what you're saying is that, you know, if you want to change the environment, you have to do it by example, basically. You know, invest in your own research agenda, build your own research agenda, and implement it with the highest possible standards, so that, you know, ultimately people will get interested in the question you are asking and in the answers you're finding, rather than chasing chasing opportunities, perhaps short-lived opportunities to enter specific debates. I think that's a very important message, and a very interesting one coming from CERES, of course, because obviously as an independent organization, you also have to keep in mind, you know, your counterparts, your clients, in a way, and who you produce research for. So I think that's actually very encouraging to hear this message coming from you. One would assume maybe that researchers in universities have that luxury, in a way, to set a little bit with more independence the research agendas. We are really coming to the end of our time. So before everybody logs off, I just wanted to thank Roberto, Sharim, Luis Pablo, Ebe, Laura, Horacio, and you know, all of you who have attended this webinar for your time. You will be able to find the full report on our website, gdn.int. It will be uploaded, if it's not uploaded already, it will be uploaded in the next minutes. I think Joao also shared in the chat box a link to a SurveyMonkey survey to help us kind of for feedback on this webinar, to help us evaluate a bit this format of a webinar. There's plenty of things happening in the next weeks in of course at GDN, but also specifically for the Doing Research program, and including in Bolivia, because the team is planning a national dissemination event, which I believe is planned for next week. But we can send all of you information about it. It will be partly online, so you'll be able to attend it also if you're not in Cochabamba. But of course, we are also launching a report, a very interesting report, authored by an amazing team from Venezuela, including Hepe, this week. So look out for that one as well. And there's another webinar on Myanmar, which is coming up as well next week. So please leave us your email if you want to know more about this program. There's plenty happening next. Thanks again, everyone, for your time, and particularly to the team and the commentators for the precious insights. Thank you very much.
Sí, me apagó.